Welcome to CELT-cast, the bi-weekly podcast from the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Concordia University, Wisconsin in Ann Arbor. Your hosts, Rob Balza, Kate Robertson, and Kari Bjerke, bring you conversations with professors and thought leaders from around the world, sharing fresh insights on teaching and learning. This academic year, 2025 to 26, we're focusing on one of the most transformative forces in education today, artificial intelligence. Whether you're a faculty member, educational leader, or simply passionate about learning, CELTcast is your space to explore ideas, spark curiosity, and imagine the future of education together.
All right. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to our latest edition of CELTcast. My name is Dr. Kate Robertson from the CELT. I am super happy to be with you all today, and I'm going to pass to my dear colleague, Kari Bjerke. Hey, Kari.
Hi, Kate. I'm so happy to be here and join everyone. I'm Kari Bjerke, and I'm an instructional designer who also works in CELT, working with the School of Business. And we're so excited to interview another expert, as we'd like to say, on AI, or at least someone who has some experience in the higher ed world with AI, and just to kind of pick his brain on what his experiences have been. So I'll let Kate kind of introduce him.
Yeah, so we have done, and you're going to have to, one thing I did not do in our show prep is tell me how to pronounce your last name,
Oh,
please.
excellent. It's Saucier, like more than saucy.
Ah, gotcha. So it's Dr. Don Saucier from Kansas State University, and I'm going to let him do a brief intro of himself. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Don. I'm a professor of psychological sciences at Kansas State University. I'm also a University Distinguished Teaching Scholar, which is the highest teaching honor K-State gives. And for the last 7 years, I've been our faculty associate director of our Teaching and Learning Center. And to say that I'm an expert on AI is probably an exaggeration, but I'm not sure many of us are right now. So I'm really
Fair
excited to have
enough.
this conversation.
Yes, yes. Well, and I again so appreciate you taking the time and since Kari and I work in our CELT, the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, it sounds like kind of the equivalent to what you have at Kansas State. So
Yeah,
I'm glad that's near and dear to your heart.
excellent.
Thanks.
So we were really excited to talk to you today, Don. We had both read one of your articles from Faculty Focus, the one lessons learned from students using AI inappropriately in my classroom. And so we were just hoping that you could tell us a little bit about your experience, especially with that final course paper that kind of prompted you to write that article.
Yeah, I appreciate you reading the article. That's awesome. So what I kind of wrote about was this kind of weird experience that I'd had in a general psychology class. So in that class, the students have to earn research credit. And there's a number of ways they can earn that research credit, but it's just credit. It's not, it doesn't come with a grade, it doesn't come with points. And one of the ways you can do this is to write article summary papers. And what we do is we specify it's got to be one of these two psychological journals, it's got to be from this calendar year. So some of my students participated in research studies, other wrote these summary papers. So a couple of my students submitted these summary papers, and I realized immediately I did not do a really good job teaching them how to do APA format. So they're trying to tell me what articles they use. They're often, first semester, first year students. They haven't done this before. So they're giving me like parts of titles and all these kind of things. So what I was trying to do is find out, were these actually papers that were written based on articles from these two journals in this calendar year? So I'm uploading the information I have to Google Scholar. And for the most part, I'm doing a really good job. But a couple of the papers, I couldn't find anything. And I looked a little bit closer with the information they were giving me. And one of the students, the names of the authors were like Johnson, Smith, and Doe. So I was like, oh, that doesn't
Very
seem
generic.
right. So I'm starting to realize like these papers don't exist. So what kind of happened here? And one of the things I always do anytime I have kind of a situation in which I have a violation of my AI policy, and my students did know they were not supposed to use it. I had a very clear policy that said you can't use AI unless I tell you you can use it, and I'm telling you not to use it. That was my policy in this paper. So in those situations, I always reach out to the students first. I see whether or not I make a report to our honor integrity system. I want to know what did the student do? What's happening here? Because oftentimes they give me some information I was not privy to. So a couple of the students that I reached out to had kind of interesting answers to that question. And the one that was kind of most interesting is the student said, I used AI to find the article. I was like, wait,
Oh.
you used AI to find the article? I was like, yeah, I used AI to find the article. And I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. So tell me what you did. So they said, well, actually, what I did is I used AI to get me a summary of the article.
Hmm.
But then I used a summary of the article to write my actual paper. So I went back and I looked a little closer at the paper, and I do believe the student wrote the paper. I realize AI checkers are not 100% certain. My ability to look at a paper and tell you it was written by AI, I'm not 100% certain on that either. But, the grammatical errors and the way that the thoughts were kind of coming out and things, it looked like that was undergraduate student writing. But what they did is they thought they were writing an article summary of a real article, but that article was hallucinated by ChatGPT. The other
Wow.
student kind of quickly came out. They knew they were doing some wrong stuff there, but this student didn't realize the extent to which they were potentially violating the AI policy in my class because they said I actually only used it to find the article. I didn't use it to write my paper. And wasn't drawing much of a distinction, for instance, between using AI like ChatGPT to find an article versus using something like PsycInfo or Google Scholar to find an article. So the student wasn't kind of understanding that nuance. The other student, like I said, was more egregious, and I dealt with that slightly differently. But this student is like, this I think is a teachable moment here. What we've got to do is kind of educate the student about what the issue with AI is they didn't actually go into the literature and find you anything. It
Sure.
gave you this summary that it hallucinated from a number of things. It looked real enough to someone who doesn't know what they look like, and then use it inappropriately. So it gave the student the opportunity to redo the paper and those sorts of things. But complicating this even more is for that other student who, a little bit more egregious kind of violation of the policy, this paper isn't worth any points in my class. This paper is just you have to do it to kind of complete the class, but there's no points associated with it. So what would be an appropriate kind of sanction for a student who used AI on a non-credit assignment? So
Hmm.
this is something I was starting to struggle with, and I kind of realized at that point that my AI policies were not up to the task of actually providing me as an instructor enough guidance on what to do in these situations, and maybe to my students enough guidance about why I have this policy in the first place to keep them doing the work that I want them to be doing.
I'm so glad you said that, Don. That's so interesting because, like many universities, we have an AI policy here at CUW. But I mean, what you just said in your article, it just seems to indicate that that's not enough guidance for
Mhm.
students, right? Maybe it's a starting place, but we need to do more. So I guess what are you starting to do now in that regard?
Yeah, so a couple things that I'm starting to do now. Number one, I'm having more of an upfront, overt conversation with my students about AI. I kind of like AI, right? My students kind of like AI. There's a lot of cool things to do with that. So I'm spending more time talking about how and when they can use it as a tool because I think a lot of students, and they're saying this wonderful tool you're preventing me from using that I'm going to use in everyday life. And I
Hmm.
think some faculty, and I think early on, I kind of was in this camp a little bit too, is like just put the head in the sand and say, oh, well, I don't want to admit that it's out there, right? So what I'm doing now is I'm saying I want you to use it here, and it's helpful here but not here for these reasons. And I'm a social psychologist by training, right? So when we're trying to get people to kind of listen to what we're telling them, giving them evidence, giving them persuasion, giving them arguments for that is going to be more compelling. So I'm not just being mean. I'm doing it because it's giving you inaccurate information, right? This is
Sure.
not going to help you because it's not accurate. So, for instance, in one of my classes, if you're familiar with Notebook LM as an AI tool,
A little bit.
so Notebook LM, at least the way that I've used it, is you can upload a PDF of a journal article, and what it does is it creates a podcast out of that. It's one of the options that it has, and you have a male sounding character and a female sounding character talking about this article, and in 10 or 15 minutes, they'll give you a really nice overview of what that article is about. Now, you're going to miss a lot of the nuance and specific detail, but if I'm teaching a low-level class where my students are saying, I'm not reading that article, it takes a long time, but they might listen to the podcast, I actually
Mhm.
teach them to use Notebook LM in that regard. So that's a great way to get a little bit of an insight into what those authors are talking about with the research project, but it's not enough to write your master's thesis on. So kind of showing them where those limits and boundaries are. So I'm having much more of an open conversation about why I have these rules in place. Then I'm telling them what I consider those rules to be. So for instance, a lot of people have, you can't use AI for idea generation. Like, what does that mean? Or sometimes even worse, you can use it for idea generation, but not for preparation of content. Where's that boundary? Where do you move from the idea generation to the preparation of content? So kind of
Sure.
defining those terms, I think a little more is going to be helpful. But then what is the sanction? right? So when this happens, what am I going to do? What's the stick that's going to happen if you're not kind of adhering to this AI policy? And I think what we've done, I've been guilty of this, and a number of colleagues have as well, is we've just said like you can't do it. What does that mean? What does it mean you can't do it? So often what we're doing is that if this happens, we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to collect information about it. And if I find it's a violation of the policy, I'm going to recommend a sanction to our honor integrity committee that could include up to failing the class, right? So
Right.
now what happens is a little bit of meat behind that, but there's also some flexibility, right? Because even in the case where I talked about these two students, I don't think they violated the policy in the same way, right? What looked like to me was similar, but the processing and getting there didn't, in my mind, kind of didn't indicate, the same level of transgression. So putting something in there where your grade is now on the line if you violate this policy is now clear. I've told you why I have the policy. Now I'm telling you what's going to happen. I think those elements have to be part of our AI policies. And I think the reason they haven't been is we didn't have our heads wrapped around this idea. We didn't have our heads wrapped around how AI could be helpful. And we wanted to give ourselves some flexibility. Well, one of the ways that I give myself flexibility is I'll often say you cannot use AI for any of these things unless the instructor permits it on the assignment. Because I want to allow myself the opportunity to do this, right? So, for instance, I teach a principles of college teaching class. So, teaching people to be college professors, basically, tell them create an assignment, then have AI complete it, then grade the assignment. I want you to use AI in that way, right? So,
Sure.
so there are really cool ways to kind of do this. Yeah, have AI write a teaching statement and then tell me whether or not you'd hire that person, kind of thing. That's why we write our own teaching statements, because that statement is vanilla and not impressive at all, right? So this is why we do that. So I think there's a really good tool that we can use here, but we've got to be much more proactive and take an initiative at telling them when and how the tool is appropriate, when it's not, and what's going to happen if I catch you doing it.
Well, and Don, that's so interesting because I do feel like it's at least where we've kind of started with AI, there's kind of been this, here's a policy, it's for the class, blah, the end, right? And it almost sounds like you're saying that like each specific assignment or activity within the class needs that discussion. And like you said, it may not be the same for every assignment or every activity.
I absolutely agree with that. One of the things I do in some of my classes where, like, if I have a take-home exam, for instance, like you cannot use AI on this thing. The last question is them inserting our honor pledge. And what that
Mm.
honor pledge says is, I understand I was not supposed to use AI on this assignment, and I assert that I have it. So what happens there is it's not in any way unclear what my rules on this assignment were. And also let them know, if we get to that point where I have to sanction, you've now admitted that you couldn't do it on this. So I think it's a really good reminder, but it also kind of helps later on if we have to get to that kind of enforcement stage. And I will admit, my enforcement skills are not top notch. Because it's not where I want to put my energy. I want to put my
Right.
energy in creating the best educational experiences I can for my students. I want to focus on the positive. I do not like, submitting a student to the honor integrity system. So it's got to be something pretty egregious. I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking for this in my assignments. But if it's there, I can't ignore it.
And that's interesting that you bring that up, Don, because I know in your article you talked about the reason why a lot of students sometimes choose to use AI, whether it's to cheat or to help them along. And a lot of this you said was because they're stressed out, they have too much workload. And so you kind of started talking about ways to reduce that end of semester stress. What advice would you have for instructors or faculty to kind of embrace that so that students maybe aren't pressured to use that inappropriate use of AI?
Yeah, I love you're asking this question because I think we don't consider this question maybe enough, right? One of the things I really appreciated about our honor integrity system is they participate in our professional development series and they do training workshops. And they say that a large number of cheaters do so because they're desperate, right? So it's
Mm.
it's not that they're, dishonest people. It's not that they're, trying to manipulate the system, is they just got too far behind. And they did this as kind of a Hail Mary attempt to get some points in that assignment. And I think the end of the semester in particular, we as a field do not do a good job of making that end of the semester fulfilling, validating, or comfortable for any of us, ourselves included as instructors. I think we have
Sure.
too many assignments worth too many points with too many pages and those sorts of things. So the recommendations that I'm going to make are to employ a much more empathetic course design of your course at the end. Don't have all of your points at the end. Don't have a lot of high stakes things at the end. And there's a real epiphany for me at one point when I realized in a class that I taught at the graduate level a few years ago that 51% of the points came in the last 10 days of the semester.
Ooh,
That is
wow.
that is ridiculous, right? And I was when I kind of realized that and realized that that wasn't actually unusual when I started to look at other classes, right? That's completely inappropriate, right? So no wonder my students are overwhelmed. No wonder they're stressed out. They're going to finals week having no idea how they're doing in the class. And that's after, 15 weeks of work. That just doesn't sound right to me.
Sure.
So lower stakes assignment more frequently, no high stakes stuff at the end. If you don't need to have a cumulative final exam, don't. If you don't need to have a really big final project, don't. If you do need a really big final project, maybe make that due 2 weeks before the end of the semester to kind of keep away from that crush. There's kind of this, unfortunate rule that everything you give is going to come back to you. Every assignment you give is going to come back to you. So give yourself some grace in this too. One of the things I really focus on is the experience of the instructor. So let's be nice to our students and be nice to our instructor. One of the best hacks that I can kind of give is to give our students maximums on assignments, not minimums. We'll often say, hey, you're going to write a paper, a minimum 10 pages. Well, what happens when that student gets to 10 pages? They're done, right? They don't read it, they don't revise it, they get to 10 pages, they're done. Now, if you think that paper needs to be about 5 pages long, give them two. Now what happens is they wrote the paper, they have to shorten it. They have to revise it. That paper is going to be better. That paper is going to be easier for you to read because it's 40% as long, but it's going to be better. It's going to actually be refined down to its essence.
Mm.
And better work is easier to grade too. So if you have shorter assignments that have these maximums kind of put in place that are a little bit shorter than maybe you think they could be, your students are going to give you their second draft, not their first. And if you're doing that throughout the semester, not just at the end, I think your students are actually more effectively building the skills they want to build. They're better and more successfully demonstrating their learning. And this is much more fulfilling to grade that good work as an instructor than to grade that bad work. So these are some of the things that I think we can do to kind of lighten that load at the end of the semester.
I love that, and I think our faculty will really appreciate those kind of tried and tested strategies. That's great.
Yeah, and I liked what you said. Sorry, Kate.
No,
But I
please,
liked
no.
what you said, Don, about like as an instructional designer, I help instructors design their courses that often are taught by multiple different instructors. But I always tell them, I'm like, if you give a final project and it's due Sunday at midnight, the last week of class, and your grades are due 2 days later, like that doesn't give you a lot of time to grade it. And students aren't seeing that feedback until after the course is over. And so I agree. I like to recommend finishing a big project 1 to 2 weeks before the end of course. And then that last week is kind of reflective work. Like, what did you
Yes.
learn? What can you take away? Or sometimes there's things in the course where you're like, well, this isn't really tied specifically to an outcome, but this is still also important. Like, you can kind of add some of those things in at that last week to just kind of round things up too.
And I'm going to emphasize a point you made there is the last assignment should be fulfilling, right? That last assignment should be something the students are proud to have done. In my principal college teaching class, the last assignment that they submit, and it's kind of like the final project kind of thing, they submit a 60 to 90-second video of them talking about their teaching philosophy. So
Aw.
it's just, we've talked about teaching for 4 months. I want you to take out your phone, tell me who you are as a teacher, submit that to Canvas. That's your final project. Like, I don't need hyper video production, any of those kind of things. I want to see authenticity and thoughtfulness. That's what I want to see. And what happens is these are so wonderful to be the last kind of, formal contact I have with my students. When I'm over finals week watching these videos and tearing up in my office, right?
Aw.
That is amazing to have them kind of identifying who they are as teachers is the last thing they do. Now, the creation of the syllabus and stuff like that, they did that 2 weeks ago, right? That kind of more formal work to demonstrate those skills. But that last thing is so fulfilling. And when I'm over finals week and all of my colleagues, like I'm sick of reading these papers, like I can't wait to watch more of these videos, kind of thing. It's a different kind of thing. I want to give assignments that I'm excited for the due date, kind of thing. So I can't wait to get in there and kind of see them. Do that for yourself. Do that for your students at the end.
Well, Don, I just think that's such a perfect place to leave our conversation on such a high and like fulfilling note. So, just thanks for your time today, Kari, and I just so appreciate it. And I know Concordia University's faculty will appreciate it as well. So, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to CELT-cast, brought to you by the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Concordia University, Wisconsin in Ann Arbor. We hope today's conversation gave you something valuable to take away, whether a new idea to apply in your teaching practice or simply a perspective to consider further. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Production for this episode was done by Ashley Curtin. Until next time, thank you for joining us and keep teaching faithfully.